you're no stranger to political engagement and what we like to call here on this show bringing home receipts. So you weren't just in office, you were actually accomplishing things, making real life impact in the lives of the folks who voted for you, and that is, from what I understand, exactly what you plan to bring to Washington. Talk to us a little bit about the demographics of your district. There are a lot of folks who are listening. It's a national show. Not everyone is as familiar with the particulars of the way in which the Navajo Nation is situated within the American government and the governing structure. So give us a little bit of sense, if you could, as to the community that you would be representing and what your hopes are for how your representation would empower them.
Sure. Well, Lori, this district
Oh,
is,
it's Lurie. It's like Marie, but with an L. Everybody says Lori. I just got to say it at the beginning. It's
oh,
like
I,
with
I
an L.
apologize. Yeah. And this district is one of the largest in the country. It is
Wow.
60% of the state of Arizona, and it is over 58,000 square miles, larger than the state of Pennsylvania. And out of the 22 tribal communities in Arizona, 14 of them are in this district. And, there's a historic element to this. I am vying to be the first indigenous or Native American to be elected from Arizona to the U.S. House of Representatives. And, there's a lot of excitement in the most rural and tribal communities here in the state of Arizona. And we truly believe that there's going to be a big turnout in voters in November. It will not only help my race, but it'll help up and down the ballot here in Arizona because, as you may know, tribal communities, tribal voters came out in large numbers 4 years ago and helped flip the state of Arizona from Republican to Democrat. And 2 years ago, the same thing happened for the statewide races, the governor, the secretary of state, and the attorney general. And we're we're praying that we'll do the same this election once again. For instance, I come from the Navajo Nation. I was the former president of the Navajo Nation. Our turnout was about 55% turnout 4 years
Wow.
ago, and we're shooting for 80%, 85% this coming election.
Okay, now I'm excited. I haven't heard numbers like this in a while. We often talk about on this show how within the Black communities, one of the highest voting turnout rates that we had was after the Civil War, when the 15th Amendment gave the right to vote to Black men, and they came out over 80%. And so the turnout rates are phenomenal, and that is something that's really exciting. I want to talk about that in just a minute because we also know that voter suppression also plays a role in making it very difficult for tribal communities to engage. So this district is huge, as you said, the largest in the nation. In addition to the 14 tribal communities that are contained within the district, are there non-tribal communities also in this district?
Absolutely, there are large non-native communities in like Prescott Valley, Flagstaff. That's where our headquarters is in northern Arizona, and it covers again 60% of the state. And
Wow.
it's very rural, very spread out. So one of the things that is difficult is going door to door. You can't do that
Sure.
like in other places throughout the country. So it is very important that we're able to get our message through, like what we're doing today on radio, XM, as well as the television. We recently recorded our commercial. I know some of us are tired of watching all those commercials, political commercials on television, but what's one more? At least ours is going to be a positive message and let everybody know that Washington, D.C. has yet to hear a voice like ours from Arizona, an indigenous perspective. And what we are saying too, that Congress should look like this country in diversity. And, we have an opportunity here to put the first Native American in office from the state of Arizona. Our neighbors in New Mexico did that with Congresswoman Deb Haaland, and now she's the Secretary of Interior. So I
Right.
think it's about time that we get an indigenous person in the U.S. House of Representatives, at least from Arizona.
Yeah, and I agree. When Deb Haaland was elevated from Congress to the Secretary of the Interior, I was thrilled because it I mean, it's a little too on the nose, but like literally it makes sense. How do we not have the original members of the original occupants of this land representative in government in a way that can speak truth to that experience, and can speak truth to what the potential of caring for this land can look like in really powerful ways? And she's done a really dynamic job of elevating a number of those issues. And so as you're talking, I'm mindful of the fact that you said 14 tribal nations, non-tribal communities. This is the physical embodiment of diversity in so many
Diversity, yes.
ways. Talk to us about some of the challenges that you think you might run into in terms of representing such diverse communities. We have a number of candidates who listen to this show and who come on this show, and they often have to balance the diverse interests of the various groups that they represent. What does that look like for you in Arizona?
I'm glad you brought that up. I've been in public service for over 18 years.
Mm.
I was a county board of supervisor, I guess equivalent to a county commissioner in the United States, in the state of Arizona. Gave me a good opportunity to know the state and the county relationship with the tribes. Also, of course, being a tribal executive leader, I was testifying before Congress because we have that special government to government relationship. And now, when I advocated for those constituency, of course, it was a little smaller. Navajo is the largest Indian tribe in the country, and they're 27,000 square miles. So this is double the landmass. And of course, the issues are similar. In tribal communities and rural communities, the need for infrastructure, bringing water into the communities that are growing, and clean drinking water into these communities, infrastructure, getting broadband telecommunication into the most rural parts of Arizona, of course, electricity and water extensions as well. And I did that as the president of the Navajo Nation. So my advocacy will only continue, but it's going to be at a larger level with non-native, non-indigenous communities. But the issues and the problems are quite similar. And I think with the 18 years of public service and that network, we'll hit the ground running. It will happen the day after the election when we win. And my opponent has been in office for a little bit over a year and a half now, and has yet to bring in any resources into this district, and just plays the politics of division and following the former President Trump at the New York trials, where there is a lot of issues that need to be focused upon here in our congressional district.
Wow. Yeah, I was always surprised to see members of Congress coming to New York, where we're based, to help the former president stand trial, missing votes in Congress, like leaving the business of the people undone, so that they could grandstand. You mentioned a couple of times the need for access to water and electricity and infrastructure, and a lot of folks who are listening perhaps are not clear because the way it's presented popularly, indigenous communities, native nations have sovereignty, and as a result of sovereignty have access to a sort of power in a way that other groups that have been marginalized and oppressed, if you will, don't have. And often when you're even hearing conversations, for example, within Pan-African spaces about issues such as reparations, you will often hear people point to indigenous communities and say, well, they have sovereignty. They have this ability to be masters of their own land and domain, and it's sort of held up as this goal. Talk to us about how sovereignty in native nations, and please correct me if I'm using incorrect terminology. I want to make sure I'm getting it right, and I definitely don't want to offend. But if you could talk to us a little bit about the interplay between how sovereignty works, and yet you're sovereign, but you're within a nation that has a history of violating sovereignty. How does that show up when it comes to infrastructure, electricity, clean water, and things of that nature?
Right. Well, let me just say that when the folks came across the ocean centuries ago, they observed the indigenous peoples there and how they governed. And little do people know that the government, the United States government, in some way took some of those themes of indigenous governance in the East Coast and adopted that into our way of governing here in the United States of America. And with that, that special relationship that I was talking about, that government to government relation, is in the U.S. Constitution. So it's tribal nations are solidified as a sovereign nation, but of course, a dependent nation under the United States. I know it gets a little tricky when it comes to that, but a lot of the laws and policies and regulations are administered by the executive branch. And sometimes the legislative branch has to change some of these policies and regulation and laws to make sure that tribal communities are able to govern themselves. And so, you know, being an executive myself as the president of the Navajo Nation, I know much about those barriers, those if you call it red tape, in getting things done. If your listeners or if you have been to a tribal community, you go into a reservation and you wonder, wow, there's no development here. There's these guys, the tribal communities are far back in time in terms of development, and that's not our fault. It's because of the policies and the regulations that are put in place by the federal government. Now we got to change those, and to have someone there in Congress that knows how to change that will not just help the tribal communities catch up with everybody else, but it also will teach non-native folks about, you know, the issues and the things that are important to tribal communities. I know that this is a bigger constituency, but federal lands, tribal lands are similar to other lands like the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service lands, the Park Service land, and there's so much similar red tape in trying to get development or even infrastructure through federal lands to get to a, let's say, a populated area. We need to also remember that some of the changes that occur in tribal communities can help get that water line into a community. I'll give Flagstaff as an example. Flagstaff is surrounded by federal lands, U.S. Forest Service lands. In order to get a water line through that Forest Service lands into the city of Flagstaff, you need to go and follow the federal regulations. And that sometimes takes a very long time. And we need to change those policies so that we can get water, so we can get the broadband and telecommunication into these non-native communities. And of course, water rights. Let me also say that tribal water rights, I've had experience in getting tribal water rights across the finish line into law, you know, in New Mexico. As you may know, Navajo is in New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. So the New Mexico water rights settlement, we fought for our fair share of water to come into our community, and we were able to testify before Congress and get that approved. And the same thing in Utah. Now we're talking about Arizona. And Arizona, we need our fair share of water from the Colorado River, clean drinking water, so that we can preserve our precious groundwater. And so tribes should be at the table, because now there's a provision in Indian water rights to where tribes can lease their water to non-native communities. And this is a win-win for everybody. You know, non-native communities can get their water because of their growth, and it'll bring revenue into tribal communities so that they can utilize that as well to, you know, improve the quality of life for their citizens. So I think it's a win-win for a lot in bringing water infrastructure into the most rural parts of the state.
This is why it's important to have people who are connected to the communities in elected office and having people who
Right.
are intimately familiar with the challenges there, and being able to represent them. I want to, we have just a moment or two left, but I wanted to go back to the geographic expansiveness of this district. One of the things we've talked a lot before about on this show was the way that the states, when it comes to how they manage elections, there have been a number of rulings that have really had negative impacts on Native communities' ability to gather ballots. I remember learning, we do, when I'm not on these airwaves, I run a racial justice law center, and redistricting and census justice is something we're really heavily focused on here in New York City. And I remember engaging with my counterparts across the country and learning that in many rural Native Nation lands, they don't necessarily have addresses, mailing addresses, the way
Right.
that we have, that we think of traditionally. And so mailing out a ballot is almost impossible. Getting a ballot from your home to be mailed into a system that will be picked up and then sent to the Bureau of Elections, where it can be properly counted, can be a challenge. How does redistricting and how does the current state of affairs with regards to elections and how elections are run, is your community, is this district in a position where they are not going to be hemmed up by some of these efforts to ensure that the votes of Native peoples are not included in the overall ballot counts?
That's a great question. There's um, so many things I could talk about right now in terms of what you just mentioned. But let me go to the redistricting. You know, the U.S. Census did their count a few years ago during the height of COVID, right? And so tribal communities believe there was a big undercount, and I know communities of color would say the same thing because you know
Mhm.
when someone's knocking on your door during a height of a pandemic, they're not going to open their door, you
That's
know.
right.
And there's such an undercount in Arizona. It was projected that Arizona would have received a new congressional district because of the population, but there was an undercount, so it stayed the same. So it means the districts were larger now, and because of
Mhm.
the redistricting, you know, there was an area, a heavily populated Republican area that was included into the district of like communities, and we lost a district, and now what we're saying to people is it is important to vote and to exercise that right during this election. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court just recently ruled, and maybe you know, for the state of Arizona, that they have to show proof of citizenship. Now, I mean, I understand. You know, we think everybody's got an ID, everybody's got a birth certificate, but in rural communities in this country, some folks didn't get, they weren't born at the hospital.
That's right.
More so in Indian country. You know, our elders, some of our elders out there were born at home and they weren't able to get a birth certificate,
Right.
but they're indigenous people. Now, with this Supreme Court ruling, you know, it disenfranchises our elders from voting because now they have to show proof of citizenship, show an ID to cast a vote. Now, the Supreme Court ruling just happened a few weeks ago, and there's going to be a very difficult time to get our elders their birth certificate and then also get their ID in time for this election. So some of them may not be able to vote in this election that's coming up. But that is the reason why we were out there trying to get more people registered and then more people to come out and vote. And if you heard this and you're interested in learning a little bit more about our campaign, go to jonathannez.com. You can register to vote. Those of you in Arizona, register to vote there, or even check up on your voter
Right.
registration. One of the things that
Right.
happened in
Right.
Arizona too is that if you don't vote in a couple elections, they remove you from the roll.
Yeah.
And you know, those are things that are happening here in Arizona that are pushing back and disenfranchising folks here in rural and tribal communities.
Well, we're spreading that word. We've been tweeting out your website, and folks, it's Jonathan Nez. That's JONATHANN NEZ, like zebra, .com. So Jonathan Nez, NEZ, like zebra.com. There you can find out information about the campaign, and you can donate, because y'all, traversing all of this land is not cheap. Between gas and signs and turnout numbers and getting volunteers what they need in order to show up, these campaigns they run on joy, but they're fueled by dollars. So we need to make sure that people are going to send resources and support, because everything that you're talking about, one of the reasons I've been very excited about this election, in addition to all the others, is that we are in a moment where we can focus on all the things that we have in common, as opposed to focusing, let other people focus on the things that keep us apart. But the things that keep us in common, we all need clean water. We all need electricity. We all need infrastructure. And having someone who can speak from a community and advocate for a community in Congress that has been one of the most marginalized, that to me is a real source of potential power. So I'm rooting for you, and I hope that we're sending you lots of good luck and blessings. And hopefully the audience will be sending you some volunteers and some donations as well. We have just a second left. Any final word? We only have like 30 seconds, but any final word of instruction, advice, or hope for the future?
Right. Well, thank you again for the opportunity to be on the show. You know, there's a movement here in Arizona and all across the country to protect our democracy and to make sure that representatives talk about the issues that are affecting us, and not this divisive rhetoric that we're hearing, the far right, the far left, but the majority of the people are right in the middle. They care about infrastructure. They care about the high prices. We need to lower those high prices in the grocery store, the gas, also making a living affordable, and to get ahead in life, and to put something down for our children, our grandchildren, and 7 generations into the future.
That's right. That's right.